Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer Hill, and I'm a biologist at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's National Conservation Training Center. Before introducing our guest speaker, I would like to acknowledge that NCTC is located in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, in the homeland of the Massawamack Nation. And for that, we give thanks, as it is on these lands that we are able to conduct the continuing education of service employees and our partners. Today, we are going to hear about the significance of feathers to Native American cultures from Liza Roman. Liza Roman is a wildlife repository specialist at the National Eagle and Wildlife Property Repository. She has worked for the repository for the last 8.5 years on the Eagle program. Liza works mostly on the administrative side of the Eagle program, ensuring orders are processed and entered into the database system for thousands of applicants. On occasion, she gets into the lab to help out with feather counting for the shipments of hundreds of feathers a month. Liza was born and raised in Taos, New Mexico. Taos Pueblo exposed her to the cultural and religious significance of eagle feathers and how they play a role in Native American lives. As a young girl, she frequented many seasonal ceremonies held by the Taos Pueblo and has grown to love the culture and respect the foundation, which is still practiced there today. Liza notes that the Taos Pueblo is the only living Native American community designated as a National Historic Landmark and World Heritage Site by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It has been inhabited continuously for over 1,000 years. Liza, I'll now hand it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. First and foremost, I do want to thank NCTC for giving us the opportunity to present today. That being said, let's jump right in with some background about the repository. Next slide. The repository is located on the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge, northeast of Denver, Colorado. It's established in the early 1970s in recognition of the significance of feathers to Native Americans. Originally, it was based out of Ashland, Oregon, and we're the only location in the United States and have been working from our current building since 1995. Next slide. What does the repository do exactly? The repository receives, stores, and distributes bald and golden eagles and their parts for religious purposes. A 1994 presidential memo requires all dead eagles and their parts be shipped to the repository for processing and distribution. The birds and any parts and feathers come to us from places like rehab, zoos, car strikes, lead poisonings, natural death in the wild, amongst many others. We receive and send them throughout the United States only. Transport to and from Canada and Mexico is allowed with proper permits. And as of January 30th, 2020, there are 574 federally recognized tribes currently eligible to request these eagles and their parts from us. Next slide. Staffing. We are a small staff of 6 for the entire nation. So 2 staff members work in our lab, 4 other staff members verify applications and prepare orders for shipping. For the 2 in the lab, their work consists of unboxing hundreds of birds and or parts and looking each one over for condition to be used in the program. The other 4 staff members' work consists of calling, emailing, mailing shipment verification letters, updating the applicant's information on file if necessary, and giving status updates on when their orders will be shipped. We typically receive about 50 to 75 calls a day as a whole group. So as you can see, this adds up quickly within a week. Next slide. The volume of orders at the repository, we support over 60,000 applicants, and we add about 1,200 new applicants per year. So that's orders received in the form of electronic or by mail-in paper form. In 2019 alone, we had 3,004 incoming items processed in our lab. 3,342 orders were received. That's both new applications and reordering applicants sending those in. 1,695 orders were shipped throughout that year. And in 2020, we saw a slight decline to these numbers due to the pandemic, but staff did work at limited capacity still during the entire pandemic. So to keep the orders moving and providing our Native American communities some relief during these difficult times. Next slide. What does an order look like? Applicants may request a single head to an entire eagle. They are limited to parts found on one whole bird. So for example, an applicant cannot order 2 heads in one shipment, and they can only have 1 pending order at any given time. The picture on this slide is of the 2 species, so bald and golden, and then the 2 age groups we classify feathers by, adult and immature. As you can see in the upper left-hand corner is the adult bald, which is a solid white tail, solid brown wing feather. Just underneath that is the immature bald, and those are spotted or speckled in pattern, and that's both wing and tail. Upper right-hand corner is our adult golden. This one has a zigzag pattern, both wings and tail feathers. And the bottom underneath that on the right-hand side is the immature golden. These are the most sought after feathers in the program, and they have a black tip with a solid white bottom toward the quill, both wings and tail feathers. As the immature feathers develop into adult, that band of black extends to the bottom, thus becoming dark with the wavy pattern. For the immature bald, those feathers change from the quill to the tip of the feather, and so they get whiter in color as it approaches adulthood. Next slide. The National Eagle Program is a first come, first served program. Our categories for ordering are whole birds, wing and tail combinations, a pair of wings only, a tail only, or loose feathers. Wait times can be long. For a whole bird, it's anywhere from 4 months to 7 years. For a pair of wings, anywhere from 4 to 9 months. And then for loose feathers, anywhere from 4 months to 3 years. Our inventory is controlled by supply and demand. And so the demand, as I said before, for the golden eagle feathers, it's very high. And so our supply coming into the repository is extremely low. The amount of goldens we get in are minimal, and the condition of the feathers majority of the time is unusable. So this creates that 7-year wait for 12 tail feathers, essentially. Unusable condition is classified as feathers broken in half, missing whole sections, or having holes for mites or other pests, depending on where the feathers were found or turned into us from. Incomplete feet, meaning the talons may be missing or decomposing. The heads could be losing feathers and the beak broken at the tip or incomplete. So those are kind of some of the conditions we get the eagles into the repository in, and a lot of that's not usable for the program going forward for applicants. Next slide. These are our whole tails and our loose feather orders. This is what they look like in hand. So the golden eagle is the top half, bald eagle is the bottom, immature from top to left, and then same thing for the bald on the bottom. As you can see, the color patterns are very distinct from bird to bird and age to age. The picture on the right is the loose feather sets we ship out. So a 10 quality order can be 8 wing feathers, 2 tail feathers, with the option of those white fluffy plumes that you see up there on the far corner. The picture underneath that is of our 20 miscellaneous. And this is going to be typically 4 tail feathers, and the rest are going to be wing feathers. The wing and tail feathers are sent from both sides, right and left, so the applicants can get a semi-complete set of matching feathers for their use in their projects. Next slide. What is the significance of these items, you ask? Well, they symbolize major life events in Native American culture. They are a sacred and central component to religious and spiritual customs, and they're used in multiple ceremonies. such as naming ceremonies, graduations, or military honors, death ceremonies, marriage, and powwows. Powwows are the social gatherings for Native American communities. They can be private or open to the public. I know from experience the Gathering of Nations in Albuquerque, New Mexico is one of them held annually. 565 tribes from around the nation and 200 from Canada join in on that. They typically have traditional dances, competitions, and regalia specific to the tribe is prominent. It's a time set aside for coming together as one and honoring the culture as a whole. Next slide. How are they worn? They can be worn in various ways. Each ceremony is different for what is being celebrated. As seen here, graduation is a major life event, and it's celebrated with the gifting of a feather to the graduate. So typically, we get requests for the women to have plumes, and so they get 2 plumes with those orders. And for the gentleman, it's usually a single secondary wing feather, and they are placed on the caps attached to it with leather and beaded edges in patterns symbolic of their individual heritage. Next slide. Here you can see the amount of work taken to create such regalia. It's another way to wear the feathers for our applicants. Far left is the arrangement of the feathers. So they are symmetric in size and pattern, and they're set up so that it looks symmetric. The middle picture is a depiction of them being attached to one another, and usually that's with string or leather to attach them to each other, and then they pin it to a board to keep it in place. The far right is a semi-complete product where the beading is done and any depictions or symbols specific to that tribe are placed in the center. This will be attached to a belt of material or leather to be worn for ceremonies. 24 feathers come on a single wing, and on the bustle alone, as you can see here, there are close to 48 feathers. And so that shows this applicant had to order multiple orders to obtain the feathers or a complete set of wings in good condition to create this. Next slide. This is a finished product. It's an eagle feather bustle. As you can see, the colors are very intricate and the detailing and position of the feathers are very specific. And so they'll wear this for dancing ceremonies. Next slide. Heads and feet. These are also commonly used in ceremonies as prayer sticks or for staffs. As you can see here on the left is a prayer stick with an eagle foot attached with fur and some beaded or decorated leather. On the right-hand side is a partially complete staff. This one's the head of a golden attached to the stick, and then this will be decorated also with leather and single feathers the length of the staff. Next slide. So in the repository, in relation to the Native community, it's definitely a partnership for the greater good. In Native American culture, eagles fly highest and closest to the Creator, thus allowing prayers to be carried up to them. They use these parts in everyday life for their prayers and protection, and they hold great power in the culture. It's a long-standing tradition and carried on for centuries and passed down from generation to generation. The repository provides the legal means to access these majestic birds and ensure the conservation of a species that's not only a national symbol, but for everybody to enjoy in longevity. Next slide. Species restrictions and protections. There are a few in relation to the eagles and the repository. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, often referred to as MBTA, implements 4 international conservation treaties with the US, and these are entered into with Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Russia. And the time range on that is anywhere from 1916 to 1976. So it's intended to ensure the sustainability of populations of all protected migratory birds, species golden and bald, included here for the import and export of the parts. And then you have the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act of 1940, also known as BAGEPA. And this one provides the protection for the bald and golden eagles by prohibiting, except under certain specified conditions, the taking, possession, and commerce of such birds. This is at any time or by any manner, and alive or dead, and any part thereof. So that's to include their nests and their eggs as well. Amendments were done on this one, or continue to be. In 1972, it increased penalties for violating provisions of the Act. In 1978, it authorized the Secretary of the Interior to permit the taking of golden eagle nests that interfere with resource development or recovery operations. And the 1994 memorandum from President Clinton set out the policy concerning collection and distribution for religious purposes. There are specific eagle permit regulations in response to that, and they're set forth to obtain the permit for religious use. And then finally, we have the Lacey Act, which was passed in 1900. It became the first federal law protecting wildlife. It enforces civil and criminal penalties for the illegal trade of animals and plants. And today it regulates that import of any species protected by international or domestic law. So this concludes my presentation on the significance of these feathers in Native American culture and how the repository fits into all of that. So I hope you learned a lot or even a little bit more about the repository and our partnership with tribal nations across the US. It definitely has been one of many relationships grown over hundreds of years, and it's maintained for a greater purpose.
Great. Thank you, Liza. We're going to go into questions and answers now. So if you have questions for Liza, please enter them into the chat and we'll get to those. One of the first questions that we received so far is, are tribes limited to a specific number of requests?
They are not. So their permit is good for their lifetimes, and they can have one pending order at any given time. So once that pending order is completed and shipped to them, it's considered finalized. So then they can put in another reorder right after that.
Okay. How about other bird feathers? Do tribes collect feathers from other species of birds besides the bald and golden eagle?
They do, and there's two other repositories that are non-eagle repositories, one in Oklahoma, and I don't recall where the other one is right now, but there are two that they can request feathers from other birds from them specifically with specific permits.
And how does the Migratory Bird Treaty Act affect the collection of those feathers? Are you aware of that? Of how that impacts them?
So the Migratory Bird Treaty Act essentially in the beginning closed off eagle feathers and bald eagle feathers from anybody, access to them from anybody. So that also included the tribes as well. Since then, the exception has been put in there for Native Americans for religious purposes. And so the treaty creates that import-export for them, and that's within state borders and then across international lines as well. And so there is an exception to that treaty that establishes a longevity for Native American tribes to be able to access us in the repository through that permit, and then have full access to anything they need for the bald and golden eagles.
Okay. Do you know if that applies to other bird species or just to the bald and golden eagle?
There are some other species, and it's basically for the conservation of those specific ones, but that would be something a little bit more I'd have to look into. The permit offices would have more information on what permits are required for those ones in particular.
Okay. How about Is there an age limit for obtaining a permit?
Yes, so you have to be 18 years or older. There is an exception in there for applicants that are not 18 years or older. Typically, those feathers are passed down from generation to generation, and that is allowed for those applicants, such as the graduates that are probably not 18 yet by the time they graduate, and for the younger generations. So they get feathers passed down to them, and then just documentation as to where they got them and who they got them from. And then that person has to have the proper permit for that.
Okay, that's interesting.
Hmm.
Here's one. Do you happen to know the total number of feathers on a bald eagle and a golden eagle?
So flight feathers, there is 24 feathers per wing side, so 48 feathers on a pair of wings. And then there's 12 flight feathers on the tail. Um, Everything else in between that is an odd number or a number that we can't narrow down. Plumes are one of those, and so they grow like hair follicles to the bird. And so there's no set number per each bird. And then you have covert feathers, which are the feathers that lay on top of those flight feathers to protect them. And there's no actual count of those either. So the main flight feathers, you have 48 on the wings and then 12 for the tail.
I can picture you counting all the feathers on the eagle and going through that process.
For the flight feathers, we do. That's what our lab folks do. They count them one by one to make sure they're all there, and then check them one by one to figure out, is that feather usable? Is it going to be good enough to go back out?
Yeah. In the chance that a person encounters a dead eagle, what are the proper rules or the protocol for getting it to where it needs to go?
So first and foremost, it is illegal for anybody to be in possession of them if you do not have a permit. If you do happen to find it, our first line of advice is to contact your local fish and game agency, or find out if there's a Fish and Wildlife Service office nearby to do that. Um, and then if nothing else, definitely contact the repository and we can help you um, get through that and manage what that looks like to get that either sent in to us, or given to an office nearby so that they can also send it in to us as well.
All right. Let's see. How has the delisting of the bald eagle affected the repository's work, if at all?
So the delisting, we see an influx in what we get in, but we can't pinpoint that that's the exact reason as to why. So for the delisting in itself, that was because the population is getting back to a point that it's sustainable. And so in that, we're also seeing at the repository an increase in supply of those bald eagles for that reason. So when you don't have a population, you don't have the mortality rate there. So the repository doesn't receive those birds. And so now that the population has increased, then we see the increase in mortality that the repository acquires.
Hmm.
It's not definitive, but that's how we see the fluctuation in our inventory from environment.
Okay. We have a question here. Does the service help tribes with permits for breeding purposes?
Um, I am not sure, to be completely honest. I know they would have to go through the Fish and Wildlife Service to acquire any of that or figure out what the rules and regulations are in regard to those. So that would be something that probably the permit office would know more of, as they deal a lot with the take and rehabs, any falconry work, anything like that. The the permit offices are usually the ones that deal with that regulation and what's available out there for them.
Okay. And um, here's a question. Do you clean or prepare the feathers or carcasses before storage?
We do not. How they come in is how we process them, and then they are bagged and put into a deep freeze to preserve any of that flesh or the feathers themselves. And in that freeze, it's -4 degrees in our freezers. And so anything that's on it is automatically going to be frozen. But we do not clean them and we do not prepare them in any way so that the tribes get that natural bird in the state that it came into us in.
All right. And kind of related to this, once you've collected the feathers for a request, how do you store them until shipment?
So everything is frozen. If it's loose feathers, we can store those in a cooler. And so we typically keep those in containers so that no bugs that are in the warehouse of our repository get in there or contaminate it. And then the freezers, like I said, they're kept at a very low temperature. And so that stores and preserves everything from decomposing or that decompose process from moving forward.
Let's see here. Here's an interesting one. What are the rules for finding a dead eagle in Canada or on the Canadian border?
That one's a good one. That one would probably be in their jurisdiction to deal with. I'm not familiar with what Canada does with their eagle requests because they do have tribes and they do use eagle feathers. Um, but as far as it coming into the US, it would have to have an import permit and it would have to be imported into the US. So that set of rules kind of gives us that delineation of whose jurisdiction it would stay under. I'm not sure about what Canada has in place for their feathers or if they have a repository for that matter.
Okay. Let's see here. How, it's a little change of gears. How did you come into your profession and end up at the repository?
Well, that one's an interesting one. My background is in forensic science. And so I started out on the biology chemistry side for my degree. And then I worked for the Forest Service for a time, got in through that. And then the repository position came up. And I thought, what a better way to introduce myself to not only the conservation that Fish and Wildlife Service his mission is based on, but also to incorporate my background as far as my Native American knowledge. It's a culture that is extremely intriguing, and I grew up around it since I was little. And so that pushed me into the repository, and it's been successful ever since.
Oh, so kind of related to that train of thought, what's your favorite thing about working at the Eagle Repository?
So my favorite from in all my 8.5 years is talking to the applicants. It's finding out what exactly they're going to use the feathers for, or hearing the stories of how they used it, or how it's helped them or protected them in their lives. Um, it's hearing about that heritage, that culture that has been longstanding, and the tradition of it. They get to take something in nature and they are blessed with it. So talking to an applicant that has waited 7 years and they break down in tears over the phone with you because they're just so blessed to have this. It hits home a little bit to realize that there is a bigger connection. It's not just the natural world and Fish and Wildlife's policies. It's an actual combination of the two of them. So we get to see that on a broader spectrum. I get to be that middle person in there, conservation on one side, and then our native natural culture on the other, and we get to conjoin the two of them together. So that's the best part about this job for me, is just hearing applicants and their experiences, and hearing how blessed they are to be a part of this, which is great. And me myself being a part of it, that's great too.
Yeah, that's a pretty special role to have.
Definitely. And we're the only one in the country. So we definitely get a gambit of hearing from every nation out there, what exactly they bless, what exactly they take into account.
Okay. So kind of back to the feathers. If you don't know that what you found is an eagle feather, can you send a photo in for ID for identification? Would you do that
Yes,
to the repository?
definitely. Yep. The repository has its own website. It's on fishwildlifeservice.gov, and it's just Eagle Repository. You can look us up on there. And then we have a designated inbox for emails. And so it's repository at fws.gov. So you can send us an email on there if you happen to find something, send us those pictures. Um, and then we take a look at it and we can more or less tell from a picture, is it a turkey feather? Is it a bald eagle feather? What bird maybe could it have come from? And as you see the feathers, bald eagle feathers have a large size feather. So it's not going to be a typical raven size feather or a hawk or an owl. They're large in size. And so just by sending us that picture, we can identify it or have you send it in to us and say we'll confirm it once it's here. And so that's helpful. Pictures are always helpful.
There's a question here. Is there an opportunity for tribal members to stop by the repository and do a blessing to the remains that are not used? And also to visit the repository, how would they go about that? Who would they call?
So typically the repository is closed to any public. We do tours throughout the year for different events. You can also contact us if you want to come out as a group. You can come out and we'll give you a tour of the repository. Anything that is not used in the program, it is cremated, and then we have a designated burial site on the refuge that we intern those ashes to. And so that area has been blessed, and we do intern them into that specific location.
Okay. And um, you kind of answered this, but can you repeat it one more time? Where could people go if they want to find more information on the repository?
So yeah, so we have our own standalone website. It's fws.gov/Eagle Repository. And you can look it up on the internet under Eagle Repository as well, and that'll direct you straight to us. And there you'll find more information about the program, how to access permits and import-export permits, and what to do in case you do find feathers, and where to send them to.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And there is, let's see here. Oh, someone's sharing a feather
There, yep.
resource.
Yes, so this is the repository's website. And so on here, you can find everything that you need to know about our program and who to contact and how to contact us as well. So your applications are in there for permits, any of the laws and regulations and what those read. And that way you can figure out, is this a violation or is it not? Is it something to bring up or not? And then the possession and transport, those fact sheets in there give you access to the non-eagle repositories, as well as any other fact sheets that you need to know about. Resources also gives you our current wait times. So if anybody wants to peek in and find out what our current wait time is now for anything that we are able to give out through the permitting process, it's on there as well. And that's updated on a monthly basis. So that way our applicants have some access to a status check for their orders as well.
Cool. Nice little website view there. Thank you for pulling that up. There's a question here. Do you receive a good number of birds that have sustained death by wind turbine?
So currently we do not keep specific track of the specific deaths of the birds that come in. So wind turbine, we do. It's not going to be significant versus something like a car strike. We see those ones probably more often than not, or electricity. So if they're electrocuted, we see quite a few birds come in from that alone. But yeah, we don't keep track of how much we get in just because we don't always know um, where the bird was, what happened to it. None of that information is included. So it could be a box with 5 birds in it, and each one came in from different places to that agency. And then the agency sends them to us. And so not everything has a specific location as to where it was found or what happened to it. And then we, as the repository, we don't investigate what happened to each bird that comes in. We don't test any of it for that purpose to find out. And that would be a whole nother realm having to do basically an autopsy on the bird itself. So we don't do that. We just check the birds for the conditions and then utilize those parts for the program.
Has the repository always been staffed with 6 individuals, or does it fluctuate the staffing?
It does fluctuate. When I started, there were 3 people on board for the Eagle program specifically. And so just in the recent last 3-4 years, we've acquired about 3 people into that. And so currently we're sitting at full staffing. We do have a position for a technician that we bring in every so often seasonally to help us with our backlog, and that one fluctuates. But other than that, the 6 that we do have now has been there for the last couple of years. Previous to that, it's been minimal. So we're slowly getting there. We're slowly making progress and acquiring the team that we need. But definitely, it's been a small staff from the start. And the repository as a whole is a small staff from the start. So on our wildlife property side, we have 2 others on there. So our repository sits at 10, which is not a lot for a national program.
No, it certainly isn't. Are you able to tell us about the percentage of how many birds you get in that are usable versus non-usable?
I don't. I know the lab probably keeps that a little bit more, keeps better track of that a little bit more. 90% of it is going to be usable. There's probably about a 10% range in there that is not. We try our best to take in everything that we can. As far as if the feather just needs a simple trim, that's not something that we're going to get rid of. It's something that we want to keep and try to utilize in the program. And then you get things that are just way past decomposition. So they're brittle, they're dry, breaking. That stuff we're not going to use at all.
Mm-hmm. Do you connect with the forensic lab in Oregon for your work, any of your work?
So we do. They usually will send us stuff from there that the case is closed and they no longer need it. And so they'll send it down to us to be used in the program. And we work hand in hand with them because there's some stuff that come in from the wild, like leucistic eagles, and we're not too familiar in that on what that happens to be for the bird or specific diseases that come in on the bird that we're not aware of. And so we work hand in hand with our lab to make sure that have they seen this? Is this something they're studying? Is this a research that they could help us figure out? Is there a better way to conserve the populations? And so they're hand in hand with us. They're definitely part of it every step of the way.
Okay. I believe, let's see. Can you define leucistic?
Leucistic is basically the feather doesn't have any color in it. So it would be clear talons instead of having black talons or nails, they would be clear or white. And then the feathers, instead of having the normal pattern, like spotted or speckled on the immature or solid brown on the bald eagle, it would be solid white. And so it's a disorder within the bird that happens, but it's very, very rarely seen.
Hmm. Scrolling through to see if I've skipped any. I don't want to skip anybody's question. I think that I've captured them all. If for some reason I have missed your question, go ahead and type it into the chat now. This broadcast, one of the questions was, will this be recorded? And this broadcast is being recorded, and it will be available on NCTC's website under the broadcast section. So it looks like those are the questions that the audience has for us today, which were really good questions. So Liza, I just want to thank you for your time spending with us today and sharing your knowledge with us. We really appreciate that.
Yes, definitely. We're a wealth of knowledge for a small program, but it's definitely well worth it in the end.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today and thank Liza again for her knowledge. And NCTC will continue to host the Tribal Broadcast Series on the third Thursday of each month. So please plan to join us for our next broadcast titled Subsistence Hunting, Fishing, and Gathering in Alaska. That'll be on Thursday, 17th at 3 p.m. So thank you for joining us today and hope that you have a good day.